NASA once designed a Mars mission with nuclear rockets, orbiting laboratories, robotic probes, and a gravity assist through Venus, then killed the whole thing before a single launch. What happened? And how did politics, not engineering, lock us out of the red planet? Stick around, because comparing the bold ambition of 1969 with today's Artemis-driven and SpaceX-fueled roadmap will change the way you think about our chances of making humanity's next giant leap. Before we jump in, I have a quick favor to ask. We're just getting started and your support really helps us grow. So if you're enjoying this, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks so much, and now let's dive into today's mystery. Imagine a world where the first humans set foot on Mars, not in the distant future, but before today's younger generations were even born. That was the picture laid out in 1969 when NASA engineers proposed a mission that looked far more advanced than the one we're still waiting for today. At the center of it all was Wernher von Braun, already famous for guiding Apollo's Saturn V. Instead of resting after the moon landings, he and his team sketched a new proposal, this time not for a flag-planting sprint, but for a permanent foothold on another planet. Von Braun's Mars concept called for two enormous spacecraft to travel together across interplanetary space. The idea was bold, but practical. Redundancy. If one ship experienced a major failure, the other could serve as a backup, carrying the whole crew safely home. Each vessel would essentially be a mobile habitat, complete with shielding, laboratories, and enough life support to last for years. Unlike Apollo's minimalist design, this was architecture with safety layered into every choice. The propulsion system that made this even remotely feasible was nuclear. Engineers at the time were testing engines under the NERVA program, promising far greater efficiency than chemical rockets. A nuclear thermal rocket could cut the travel time by months, reducing radiation exposure and shrinking the risk of psychological strain during long missions. To planners in 1969, chemical propellants simply weren't practical for a sustained march out to Mars. Nuclear power didn't feel like an optional upgrade, it felt like the only road forward. Survival of the crew drove every major decision. Long stretches of weightlessness were considered unacceptable for astronaut health, so designers added rotating habitats to provide artificial gravity. The living areas were drawn with ordinary shirt-sleeve conditions, so astronauts wouldn't need to wear bulky suits inside. It was imagined like an orbiting town. Workspaces, sleep areas, and communal rooms where the crew might gather for meals. By the standards of the time, it read less like a military capsule and more like science fiction made real. Even the landing strategy reflected caution. Before risking human lives on the Martian surface, robotic spacecraft would be sent to scout. They would map out safe terrain, deliver supplies, and place equipment so the first astronauts could depend on a ready-made foundation when they arrived. This wasn't a quick dash, but a coordinated sequence, a step-by-step progression intended to minimize surprises. Here's the surprising part. This wasn't just artwork in a concept study. Nerva engines had already fired successfully on the ground, showing measurable thrust and high efficiency. Budgets were being laid out, test flights imagined, and sequence diagrams drawn in meticulous detail. If the plan had moved forward, astronauts could have walked on Mars as early as the 1980s. And yet, despite how close it seemed, the vision disappeared faster than it emerged. Why would a program with this much detail collapse before even starting its first trial? So if the technology was already sitting on the table, why didn't we plant a flag on Mars decades ago? After Apollo, many inside and outside NASA assumed the red planet would be the logical prize to claim next. The United States had just demonstrated it could land people on another world, so the expectation was that engineers would expand that momentum into a permanent roadmap. First the Moon, then Mars, and eventually beyond. At the time, it didn't seem like science fiction, it seemed like a straightforward extension of what had already been achieved. But the political reality of the early 1970s had a very different rhythm. Richard Nixon's administration inherited an agency that had just peaked at nearly 5% of federal spending. With the Vietnam War consuming resources, inflation rising, and public weariness with massive one-off space spectacles, talk of a Mars landing project began to sound less like progress and more like a budget trap. In Washington, the focus turned sharply from bold destinations to programs that could justify themselves year after year. This is why the Space Shuttle was chosen as the next flagship project. It promised reusability and frequent launches close to Earth, something more practical in the eyes of lawmakers. That shift drew blood from the propulsion programs that were meant to carry crews into deep space. The nuclear shuttle and the Nerva engine, both tested with promising results, suddenly lost funding. Without nuclear thermal rockets, the 500-day Mars mission plans hung in limbo. Chemical propulsion alone meant longer travel times, heavier payloads, and much higher costs, and there was little appetite for that in the political climate of the moment. By the mid-1970s, the once pioneering engines and the workshops built to produce them went silent, their facilities mothballed or dismantled. There was another less obvious obstacle that influenced decisions. Biologists and mission planners expressed real fear about something called back contamination. The concern was that soil or microbes from Mars could accidentally be brought back to Earth and trigger unpredictable consequences. As a result, some NASA studies proposed sending robotic missions first that would collect samples and return them for study before a human crew even tried to land. This additional step further increased costs and stretched timelines, which only gave critics more reason to call the entire project an overreach. Gradually, the grand vision splintered into smaller, more manageable experiments. Instead of funneling resources into an Apollo-style push, NASA turned toward orbiting platforms like Skylab, robotic probes like Viking, and then the decades-long investment into the shuttle program. Each project answered important questions, but none of them formed a continuous path to Mars. It was as if the dream of a single interplanetary arc broke apart into a set of scattered puzzle pieces. So in the end, the reason humans never arrived on Mars in the 20th century wasn't a lack of engines or spacecraft designs. It was the political winds, shifting priorities, and financial limits that closed the door before the first launchpad test could even happen. Which raises a new question. If politics shut down the Mars dream then, what about now? Do today's attempts rely on a stronger foundation, or are they just as vulnerable to the same forces? 50 years after that first grand blueprint was shelved, Mars has once again moved into the spotlight. You see headlines about it nearly every year, government roadmaps, private company test runs, even animated videos of sleek spacecraft touching down on the red planet. But how much of this is truly new, and how much simply echoes those old sketches from 1969? The answer is a mix of both familiarity and reinvention. NASA's public roadmap today often goes under the name Journey to Mars. Instead of a single Apollo-style program, it's broken into stages. One of those stages is the Artemis program, which focuses on returning astronauts to the Moon. On the surface, that might sound like a detour, but in practice, the Moon is envisioned as a proving ground for Mars. Everything from closed-loop life support to durable habitats to practicing construction with local materials can be tested on the lunar surface first. This builds experience in a location where crews can still return to Earth in a matter of days if something goes wrong. That lunar testbed is crucial when you consider survival on another planet. For example, in situ resource use is the idea that astronauts won't be able to haul all their water, air, and fuel from Earth. Instead, they will need to create it from local materials. On the Moon or on Mars, that might mean extracting oxygen from rock or hydrogen from ice, proving that technology on the Moon offers confidence before we rely on it in the far more isolated environment of Mars. One of the largest differences between then and now is scale of participation. Back in 1969, it was essentially NASA alone, backed by American contractors, with minimal international partnership. Today, programs are far more collaborative. The Artemis effort involves space agencies from Europe, Japan, and Canada, and private sector companies build key systems such as landers, rovers, and spacecraft components. This distributed approach broadens the funding sources and pulls in new talent, but it also spreads responsibility across different political landscapes. And then there's SpaceX's Starship. Unlike government programs with cautious stepping stones, Starship is designed as a huge leap. The vision is a fully reusable spacecraft with the capacity to carry large crews and heavy cargo directly to Mars. Its progress has already grabbed attention, raising the possibility that a private company could outpace the official government timeline. While still experimental, the ambition has already pressured traditional agencies to rethink their pacing. The next leap to Mars will not hinge on a single spacecraft launch, but on cooperation grown over decades. What was once imagined as one sweeping mission is now unfolding as a slow exchange of knowledge, technology, and commitment between many players. When humanity builds its first settlements on Mars, those outposts will reveal more than engineering skill. They will show which values we carried from Earth and which compromises we were willing to make. So stay curious, follow each new step, and keep asking how politics, technology, and teamwork shape the future we want to see. That's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got plenty more mysteries to uncover together. See you in the next one.